Welcome, everyone. I hope you're here for our community conversations. My name is Dana Arviso, and I'm a member of the Navajo Nation and a current doctoral student in our college. I also serve as the director for Unite Ed in the University of Washington College of Education. I'll be your moderator today, as it's my honor to be in relationship with all of our amazing panelists and to manage the Community Partner Fellows program. We're going to begin our time together with a land acknowledgement statement on behalf of our college. We recognize that all University of Washington campuses sit on Indigenous lands and waters. We speak from a shared territory of the Coast Salish people to acknowledge the continued sovereignty of the land that many Native nations and citizens have called home since time immemorial. Our collective responsibility is to honor their sacrifice by carrying forward their teachings and wisdom in the work that we do in partnership with our communities, wherever we call home. In recognition of all of our relations, we encourage you to understand whose land you're on. Thank you so much for joining us for this important dialogue with our community partners and doctoral students from the Community Partner Fellows program. Today's program is brought to you by Unite Ed, Connect Ed, and our marketing and communications team. With the leadership of our dean, Mia Tuan, who is here with us today, a theme that has been animating much of our work this year is the notion of good disruption. We will dig into this theme today. We want to start with the context that the global pandemic has created enormously challenging disruption to all of our lives. It's upended the ways that families, communities, and schools have worked in partnership to deliver school-based learning. Now that schools have reopened, and in some cases closed again, we've shifted our focus to the perceived learning loss created by these disruptions and are returning to more of, unfortunately, the same old inequitable practices. What if instead we leveraged how families, educators, and community partners were able to make good disruption during the past 2 years to meet the needs of students and families? In this webinar, we'll explore the complexities of these questions and hear the stories of our own local community partners, the Boys and Girls Clubs of King County, supporting partnerships in education and beyond, and Washington STEM. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Stacy is currently the Executive Director of Program Quality and has been working in the youth development field for over 13 years in various positions within the Boys and Girls Clubs of King County. Stacy works closely with program staff to create spaces for youth that are safe, both physically and emotionally, and assists in the implementation of intentional programming based on community needs. Hoyu is a first-generation doctoral student. During her time working with schools and communities in Taiwan, Alaska, and Seattle, she has practiced culturally responsive and asset-based approaches that forge connections between schools and students' homes and communities. She is particularly interested in understanding Indigenous aspects of wellness and its association with the retention and practice of Indigenous languages and culture. Regina is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Supporting Partnerships in Education and Beyond, a nonprofit organization that helps to mobilize community voices to disrupt systems by developing and implementing innovative methods for strong partnerships between parents, educators, community partners, and organizations. Her goal is to build a sustainable infrastructure that will leave a legacy beyond her leadership. Icon is a doctoral student in the University of Washington's Learning Sciences and Human Development program. Her study and research focuses on decolonizing anti-racist pedagogy and learning design knowledge for teacher education. In this, she believes that community, families, and youth play critical roles in our ongoing fight against racial injustices. Janae serves as the Chief Impact Officer at Washington STEM and is an adjunct for the University of Washington College of Education's Leadership in Higher Education program, where she earned her PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. She develops, analyzes, and applies cross-sector longitudinal data and research on systems change and student outcomes to help drive Washington STEM's business plan and strategic initiatives. Enadina is a first-generation Latinx scholar who is completing her PhD studies at the University of Washington. Through her community partner fellowship with Washington STEM, her dissertation seeks to illuminate how cultural knowledges, repertoires, experiential wisdom of Latinx migrant families can be leveraged in a rural high school to support change-making efforts in dual credit opportunities. Thank you to all of you for being a part of this community conversation. We'll get into our panel discussion now. So one of the things that we have painfully witnessed during the pandemic is that existing inequalities in education were exacerbated by the pandemic. For example, most of us were aware that there was a digital divide, but when students were receiving their education virtually, we realized just how many students and families lacked reliable high-speed internet or access to personal computers. Some of our local community-based organizations and school districts moved quickly to try to meet those gaps and creatively solve those challenges, not just for the short term, but for the long term. And as we continue to move through this pandemic, many of us are rejecting this desire to return to normal because we know that pre-pandemic schooling did not serve all students, families, and communities in just and equitable ways. During our time together, I'm going to ask all of you to speak to similar challenges that you've been working to overcome. So our first question is directed to our community leaders, Regina, Janae, and Stacy. Let's go back to March 2020. Tell us about some of the ways that your organization had to pivot in the early days of the pandemic. In what ways have you continued to pivot over the past 2 years to continually and meaningfully serve our families and communities?
I can start if it's okay with my two other colleagues. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dana, to UW and our partners. Wow, 2020 March, huh? It still feels like we're still like in this, I don't know, this circular. I feel like, you know, I'm in biology class and I am the experimental mouse that's just circling in that little, yeah, and we're just playing whack-a-mole. But, you know, just to give a little background, SPEP has always been focusing on system change and advocacy in a non-dominant culture, and really just doing advocacy through a healing approach and system change and building capacity of community. When the pandemic hit, we knew that we had to pivot because we're in service of community, but pivot so quickly into leveraging the partners that we have cultivated to provide direct services, but also being very innovative of how do we also hold ourselves accountable to meet the needs of our community? How do we continue to sustain the beauty within our community and elevate some of the harm? And one thing that I would say is that in doing that, we also learn the resilience of our community, even in the midst of not just the pandemic, but also there was a lot happening, right? We knew that a lot of other pandemics has been surfaced. And, you know, so it's not just dealing with the pandemic of COVID, but it's also dealing with everything else that we have also tried to address for so long. Generations before us have done it before us, and we walk on their shoulders, but it was just exacerbating. You know, we had to also evaluate our own capacity and be intentional using an equity lens. And when we look at South King County, we knew that there were particular neighborhoods that were a desert area. So we shifted our focus to the Skyway community, which is in South King County, pretty much the last living Black community, and it's being gentrified. The county has not made investments. There hasn't been a lot of, actually there hasn't been capital investment in Skyway. And we really invested a lot of our time in the work that we're doing in the Skyway Coalition, and working alongside other 6 amazing organizations we're so focused as a coalition to make sure that any developer or any investment that's being done in Skyway, it's co-designed with community. it's bringing resources directly and sustaining those that are residing in the community. But also, we also had to make investment in our own team, making sure that we're bringing in staff as we are hiring that could provide that bridge building and resource leveraging for our community. And we know that pandemic or non-pandemic, those resources are so needed because there's such there's such an economic gap within our communities. It's unfortunate. There's abundance of wealth, but it's the reality that you'll see within 10-mile, 5-mile radius, one neighborhood that's thriving, another neighborhood that's dismissed and not recognized. And when you look at the demographic, it speaks true to what we all know. So we really have to shift in where we are doing intentional work and legacy work, and how do we do it? And also really elevating and holding ourselves accountable on how are we cultivating relationships and partnership with orgs, so that we know that we cannot do it alone and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So what is working there? And that is the innovation part. But when it comes to also knowing that our education system hasn't served a lot of the families that we serve, or we are an organization that is 100% women of color. I'm very proud of that, and I love the team that we have. We all bring our own lived experiences, our own families' lived experiences, knowing that we're walking on our ancestors' shoulders, and we carry that legacy, and our work comes from the heart. I don't think anybody in SPEP is doing this work because we are paid what we deserve. Absolutely not. And that goes for all of our orgs, right, that are doing this work. But all of us bring our hearts, and we had to pivot very quickly, even providing academic support, which we haven't done direct services, but also being innovative around centering mental health and the well-being of our children and our families first and foremost, and not look at academic outcomes through a dominant lens where it's a metric, but really saying what are our babies experiencing, and also how are parents receiving or understanding what our babies are experiencing at home. So our community and family engagement lead person, Muna, bless her soul, came up with a very innovative approach, which she connected with educators back in Africa. And our African immigrant families got to have everyday literacy and math support via virtual from teachers that their babies may not have a direct connection to because they see themselves as American, but living in a household where there's a dual language. Also, and then one thing that we learn is, and when I say the well-being and cultural appreciation, is that a lot of our families are sharing that this was the best thing they have experienced, because now their kids, when they call grandparents or relatives back home, their kids are not saying what are they saying or what's happening here, but it's more like, oh, grandma. So really that generational bridge building. And I think that's, even though there's been a lot of heartbreak and a lot of loss, I think those are the celebrations and the milestones I want to hold. I don't want to take much time, but as we continue this conversation, I know a lot of things will come up. So I want to make sure that we also hear from our other colleagues. Thank you.
I'm happy to go next. So yes, thank you, Dana and UW, and for having this and hosting this community conversation. Super important, and very happy to be here. So for us at Boys and Girls Clubs of King County, I think when we think back to 2020, early 2020, and I just think about how much our mission and just our mantra of doing whatever it takes for the youth that we serve has been really tested. We found out schools were closing, and the next day we were open for full day care to essential workers to serve those youth who families still needed to go to work. And then our staff, before this school year, our staff were running full day programs, 11 hours a day for 79 weeks. 79 weeks, that's so long, so we were really having to pivot throughout that whole time. Like I was saying, first we were serving just youth of essential workers. Then once kind of our communities started reopening a little bit, more people were going back to work. We pivoted, and schools started remote learning. We pivoted to really support those kids in our clubs with that remote learning, ensuring that they were in their class on time, ensuring that they had, the technology available to them that they needed to be in school, and having them set up on our Wi-Fi systems. And, our IT department had to really make sure that we were all set to have all of those devices at our clubs, set up and ready to go, so those kids could participate and be there fully. And then, they go back to school, and with all the uncertainty of what that looks like, at this point, our clubs are really, we're waiting and we're at the ready for, if we go virtual again. And we're really just focusing on creating this space where kids can come after their school day and like feel some sort of normalcy. I know that we're never going to get back to normal life. And personally, I don't think we should, because normal wasn't good enough. But really, we're trying to make sure that we are listening to our community and ensuring that our clubs are like safe and supportive spaces for our kids right now.
That resonates with me so much. Thanks, Stacy, for doing what you have been doing. My son attends a Boys and Girls Club, and we are so thankful, so thankful for you all being open and doing what you're doing, because we rely on you. So, thanks. And thank you, Dana, and thank you to the UW College of Education for pulling this together. So yeah, taking it back to March 2020. So Washington STEM is a statewide nonprofit that focuses on changing policies both in institutions and at the state level. And we can only do that by working deeply in the communities of Washington State. And so we have, for almost 10 years, built deep relationships with and been in community with folks, families and staff of schools in all 39 counties of the state. And so even though we have offices that are in Georgetown, kind of just north of White Center, pre-March 2020, we were almost never in our offices because we were in community, understanding what families needed, or understanding what students were experiencing, or understanding what school staff were experiencing. And so all of a sudden we couldn't be in community, understanding the lived experiences of folks. And there's just so much lost through trying to connect with, parents or kids or staff members on Zoom. And so we had to try a bunch of different ways of making a safe space, of being able to just, hear and understand experiences on virtual platforms. So, we're still learning constantly about how to make those spaces as inviting and as communal as possible, which is just, it's not really going to happen, but, we're getting there. So that's one of the big pivots we had to make. And in the work that we do, we normally are working on changing policies or helping schools or helping institutions or helping employers change policies or practices so that they can make and create much more equitable spaces for students of color, low-income students in rural areas, and young women. And another thing that we had to pivot was we had to go back to basics with what we were supporting this past year or two. Normally, we're working with schools and institutions to support changes, in curriculum. And a good example is we normally work on supporting folks who are developing culturally designed early math for early learners, right? That is culturally competent and linguistically based for early learners to think about and access math concepts. And we had just an outpouring of early learning folks who were saying, we're trying to keep our doors open to be able to provide early learning and early care. So we literally need diapers. Like, we don't care about early math at this point. We need diapers, we need PPE, we need sanitizer. And so we just completely revamped our model for like 6 months to just make sure the supports and grants and any funding that we got could just support that. And we had to then also turn and tell the folks who were paying for those things, the big funders of the state that we work with, the Gates Foundations and the Balmers, and be like, look, we're going to spend our money this way. This is what's needed. And we kind of had to do this dance and just say, you all need to be focusing on this. And so we were the intermediary to make sure that communities were getting what they needed. And so I think we had the privilege and the responsibility, because of sort of the statewide work that we do and some of the connections that we had to funders, to basically say like, look, you need to pivot because we're pivoting because communities really have to pivot. And so that's another thing that we had to make sure that we were doing really responsibly, was making sure that any flow of funding to community was exactly what community needed and was asking for.
Thank you, Janae. So much of what you said resonates with the experiences that I saw of so many of our community partners. And I also really resonate with that idea of what does it mean to do community partnership work when you have this loss of being able to spend time in community. Pre-pandemic, I spent half my time on campus and half out in community. And I think when the pandemic happened, I felt a little bit lost about where is the center of my work when those spaces are no longer available to us. The second question is also going to be directed to our community leaders. And let's see, so what lessons have you been learning during the past 2 years that your organization is holding on to and ensuring are not lost as we, quote, step through the portal, as Arundhati Roy says, to leave behind the luggage of the past practices and policies and try to imagine a new world to fight for?
So Stacy, go ahead, please.
Are you sure, Regina?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm kind of piggybacking on a little bit of what you had talked about in the last question. I think one of the biggest things we've been learning over the past 2 years that we will definitely bring with us moving forward is we really can't do it alone, right? We have to work together as a community. We have to work with other organizations. Some, for the Boys and Girls Clubs, we throughout the pandemic has been collaborating with and communicating and working with people and organizations who, others might say are our competitors, like other people in the after school space, different organizations, but we really wanted to work together to ensure that all kids in all communities got what they were needing and they had people advocating for them. So definitely that partnership and collaboration piece is huge, and we're going to be carrying it with us, hopefully forever. Another thing is that we just really can't underestimate the importance of that human connection and how much we are hardwired as human beings for belonging, and really making sure that, we are, as we're still in the pandemic, helping to create spaces that people are craving to come together safely, right? But making sure that folks and kids in our clubs have the opportunity to just be together in space together. We've been doing some of that through having like daily community circles or peace healing circles where we're just trying to rebuild that connection, because after a very long time in a virtual space, our kids really needed that. We saw a decrease kind of in like their empathy skills and being able to hear from about someone's story or hear their experiences really helps to build that empathy. So being really intentional in creating those spaces where both our youth and staff can really come and bring their authentic self and share what's going on in their world and in their minds, without judgment from anybody else. And I will say that as much as I am very excited to get back in person, meet in person, train in person, some things can still be done virtually, and a lot of the virtual work that we've done as an organization of over 300 employees, we've had more access, and opportunities to participate in our race, equity, and inclusion work, participate in trainings that are going to help staff better support our youth. So I'm also just taking that there are still, there's still a place for virtual connections to ensure access for people and that folks are able to participate.
Yeah. Thank you, Stacy. Yes, the we can't do it alone should just be like a slogan everywhere, and moving away from the scarcity of like, I'm doing this, so therefore it should be my thing. There's abundance of things that needs to be done. There's abundance of, resources that we need to tap into. So thank you. I really appreciate that. I think, the theme of the good disruption is such a thing that I think we're holding at the core of SPEP. And lessons learned. And, this is something that has been part of our culture, but I think we are very bold and very clear about it now. And moving forward, it's something that all of us, and when I say SPEP, I'm not talking about the internal team that's working. I'm talking about the community and those that we tap into their wisdom, who actually bring their expertise and their wisdom to our work and infuse it and help us co-design what it is that we need to be doing and holding us accountable. Is that our community very clearly and loudly said, we are sick and tired of the word dismantle. We cannot fix what has been designed so perfectly, and it doesn't need to be fixed. It was never designed for us. It's never going to work for us. So our theme is, build new and reimagine. And, one thing that we hear a lot in a lot of our conversation is that we can dream and dream very big and boldly, and that we are the wildest dreams of our ancestors. So why is it that we cannot hold those dreams to ourselves and create dreams that are legacy for generations to come, not just for our babies or our neighborhood or our own ecosystem or the life that we live today, but what it is that we're living. And I think one thing that we have been very bold and brave is challenging our funders, our partners in supporting this work, and really saying that, you really need to move away from mainstream funding, and you really need to get down to the grassroots level and make sure that you're funding a true creation of new systems that is truly going to build a healthier and a healing process for the harm that has been done. And how are you evaluating your own process and really thinking around what it is that you have contributed? What are the harms that you have contributed, intentionally or unintentionally, right? A lot of times we know that it's unintentionally because we're all conditioned. This is something that has been done way before us. A lot of times we ourselves, even those of us that are so conscious, sometimes we do things unintentionally. It's not that anyone, at least I hope that none of us wakes up with the mindset of I'm going to go out to harm somebody today. I really hope that's never the thinking, but unintentionally. And so some of the things that we, at least for me personally, as my role and the privilege that I hold as a leader of this amazing org and this community that I'm in service of, one thing that I made the commitment and holding myself accountable to is that I will never sit in a space with any funder and just dance along with the notion that I'm there to get funding. The money was never yours, it's stolen money. And in order for you to do your own liberation, you need to wash it out. Wash it out means make a commitment, make a racial equity commitment and a non-dominant culture that is centering PIPAC and those that have been harmed the most. We know those resources were never yours. And the way that it's been inherited, it's completely genocide. It's completely stolen resources. And a lot of nations and a lot of civilization, a lot of communities are in poverty today because their resources were stolen. So in order for you to do your own liberation work, so we're living through what does it mean to truly liberate yourself? And what does liberation look like? And knowing that at the end of the day, when you do that work, you still hold a privilege because you're cleaning your conscience. You're doing what you need to do in order for you to liberate and broke those invisible chains, and chains are different, right? I want to be very clear that when we talk about those of us that have been harmed, there's a different chain. But when you are held because your conscience is not clear, and it's not because, and we're very clear to not do this work in a harmful way. We're very clear when we engage with folks to say that this is not directed towards you. We're talking about a generational harm, right? You may not have been, even your family directly may not have been, but you have benefited because of the privilege you hold. And in order for you to really do the work that you need to do it through liberation. And that means you need to let go. And, some of the lessons learned and it's a celebration is that we never want to go back to what we had, because what we had, and honestly, there's been conversations to say that we are very mindful. We know that this pandemic has created a lot of loss for a lot of families, has harmed a lot of people, has left some of our community members long-lasting health conditions. There's been a lot of economic loss, everything, right? But also, we come from cultures where we're also mindful of things that are written in the stars and how the earth receives us. And I think that this is Mother Nation kind of like setting the courses for us and kind of reshifting us. So, a lot of the communities we serve believe in things happen for a reason, and that even though we're going through hard times, we also need to reflect on, as humans, some of the things that we have done to the lands that we walk in, to the earth that has taken us in, and the air that we breathe, the amazing trees around us, and everything that we benefit, that we need as humans, the oxygen that, we depend on this earth. But we have done a lot of harm to one another. We lost our sense of humility. And now more than ever, we need to really think about how are we centering that? How are we holding relationships? How are we holding each other accountable? How are we correcting the wrong that we see around us rather than staying silent? And how are we making sure that we're never complicit and that we are each other's champions? We're safeguarding generations to come and setting the foundation for them so that they can do their work in a healthier way. So those are a lot of the lessons learned. Those are the conversations that we continue to have. But most importantly, I think one thing that's happening is that as an org, we are embracing the individual work that some of our community members want to do and elevating their voices so that it is infusing what needs to be done, so that we're stepping back because we need to work ourselves out of a job. So how are we setting the foundation for some of our community members and not just tapping into their brilliance, but making sure they're leading that work for themselves and for the community? And that sometimes we do need to step back and not like making sure that we never play the role of gatekeeping. Thank you.
I'll quickly draft off of that. I don't have a ton to add to that because that was beautiful and brilliant. Washington STEM is, because of the work we do, in the role of being a gatekeeper or being an intermediary, depending on how we choose to actually do our work. And prior to the pandemic and prior to the needed uprisings, we had been on a journey as a staff. We had previously been very white-led, white-dominant, and we still are in many ways because it takes many years to get rid of that. And we have been on an introspective journey of what is the role that we can play and what is the privilege and the power that we have to address some of the things that Regina just brought up in terms of pushing back on and changing things like the very dominant culture of funders, et cetera. And so what role do we have to play in that? And what responsibility do we have to play in that? And alongside that, what are the practices that we need to halt and rid ourselves of or change deeply to ensure that we're doing the kind of work that doesn't do harm? And one theme that I'll pick out that we have worked on for the past actually 3 years, but it was, I think, sped up this past 2 years, which I'm thankful for, is centering student and family voice in the work that we do. We had been doing, I think, really good work in getting the kinds of data and information that had been sort of taken from students and families back into the hands of students and families, but it was mostly focused on quantitative data and wasn't centered and grounded as much as it should have been with student and family experiential information and stories. And so I think that that's one thing that we've done that, again, I think has been sped up this past 2 years. That's a lesson learned to ensure that we're doing the work in the way that we want to do it and ridding ourselves and also sort of, again, modeling to those that we have the privilege and power to work with of how to do it right and how to, I don't know, right is not the right word, but closer to right.
Okay, I'm not sure if anyone else wanted to answer that question, but this next question is related. And I think it actually came up in a few of the responses already. This idea of good trouble. So you may have heard the term good trouble that was coined by the late Congressman John Lewis to inspire others to join him in his long commitment to social and political activism. I would argue that despite all the turmoil and loss, the global pandemic also created an unexpected space for good disruption. Here with us today as our audience, we have formal and informal educators, school and district administrators, families and community leaders, and university leaders. What can we learn from all of you as our community partners about how to carry forward the good disruptions of the past 2 years toward a more just future? And this question is open to all of our panelists. So we may want to hear from our fellows at this point as well.
Yeah, Dana, that's a really great question. And thank you for inviting all of us and being in this collective space. I appreciate it. For me, that question brings up like some of the learnings that I've done and unlearnings. And a lot of it has to do with like slowing down and really focusing on building these more reciprocal relationships with families to each other. And part of like working in the nonprofit organization, and some of the things that were done before and sort of how we're moving forward with a good disruption is that we had this like sense of urgency. And that's a very settler colonial logic where there's always this arrival point, and not really focusing on the process and building relationships. And so I think the pandemic really sort of expose these deeper realities about the relationships that schools have with subaltern communities. And I'll just like briefly mention in this one community project in the Yakima Valley, which is in Central Washington, through my community partner fellowship, it really illuminated that relationships with families cannot be rebuilt or reimagined the same way. And a lot of things that Regina was saying, how there's no going back to this normalized way of building relationships because that hasn't worked. So how do you build new relationships? And relationships that are predicated on empathy, on showing love and joy and healing. And so one of the things that we heard and still hear during the pandemic is that a lot of like our Latinx immigrant farm worker communities, like they're essential for maintaining the nation state's food supply chains. But then it also revealed that brown bodies are a commodity. So even though they're at the front lines of this labor supply system, their well-being and their health is not being valued. I could just say from my own personal experience and working and being part of the Yakima Valley, is that like a lot of my family members, they didn't get any PPE, any personal protective equipment. And they were still being forced to go into work and, you know, and being in these exploitive labor conditions. And so in similar ways, schools have commodified relationships with families where they only matter if families and communities engage in learning of their children in ways that schools expect them to. And so it kind of creates this unilateral relationship where system leaders, educators are kind of seen as the experts, but then youth and families are kind of at the receiving end or they're passive supporters. And so it really made me reflect, like, how can schools say you are essential to our communities and keeping us fed and nourishing us, but then at the same time say you are not essential and making decisions about your kids' learning. And so I think the pandemic has really given way to have these deep reflections. And so how do we start leading with families where they are seen as decision makers? Because for me, my community is more than cultivators of land. They're family, parents, elders, dreamers, and they're essential in creating these just systems of thriving. And so a lot of the projects that I worked with Washington STEM have really leveraged that expertise, and I appreciate that. So those are kind of some learnings that I want to carry forward where we're making good disruptions in how relationships are being built. Thank you.
I appreciate hearing that, Helena, because that speaks to like the fellows and the folks who are in the front line, like hearing the heartbeats of the folks, hearing the heartbeats of the land. And this notion of good disruption, I think I want to bring it to a humble beginning. And with that, Regina has mentioned Muna, one of the folks who are doing the family and community engagement. I also want to bring in Cherise, to Helen, because these are powerful women that have taught me a lot. Because the opportunity that SPED has created, despite the pandemic, the Institute has created space via Zoom, where all of us were able to witness and hear the wisdom of these women. And over, you hear this message that we have always been here. We have always been doing this work. And if you think about settler colonial, you think about chattel slave slavery. Yes, this work have been done generations, and they don't need a name from us to do this work. Their work is not going to wait for our research, for our data, for the products that we produce with research. And when I hear this, the other question that is being asked of me is like, what are you hearing? Because what these folks are saying is that they're going to do this no matter what. They're not going to wait for you to fulfill whatever expectation or whatever agenda that you have. And mind you, as a doctoral students, we have those expectations. The heartbeat of the academia is a different kind of heartbeat. And when we are welcomed into the village and we're welcomed into this community, they beat in a different heartbeat. And sometimes that good disruption happens with you. And do you recognize that is good disruption, or are you feeling really discomfort, very uncomfortable because it requires you to shift in the way you orient yourself to what research means, what data work means? And that kind of discomfort is good trouble. And it has to start with that. Because if you don't, if Helen were to ask you, do you hear me? Do you feel me? The love and the care, because this is not about your children or my children. This is all our children, like Regina say, legacy work. It's about their future. And like Helen says sometimes, it is about life and death too for some of these youth. It is life and death. So how will you be in this space as a doctoral students? That means sometimes you have to forget that the expectation in this academia, and you have to be there for them. And what it calls for in terms of data work, because, and I'll give you an example. So the data work that came out of last year from we really focus on qualitative data in terms of the gathering that we have and the stories that parents and families and youth share with us. So we gather those stories together, and we gather our SPED team and folks from the community, the parents, the families, and the youth come to collectively make sense of those stories. And that process in itself generated movements to redesign what's next. They're not going to wait for me, for ICON or the team or whoever it is working on the data work to generate findings for them to then move on. They're going to do that on their own, no matter what. So that's what I've learned. And that means that when I come to them and I say, well, you're all focused on healing the community, on survival and looking at the future. And I use the term trauma-informed practice. And Cherise tells me, hey, hang on there. That doesn't seem to sit right. We have always been doing this. That's not the language that we use. We have a language, we have a practice. We've been doing that, and listen to us. I think I'll end with that. And Helen, Sharice, Muna, if I've taken what you've shared in a direction that was not meant to be, forgive me, but that's what I'm learning. And I cannot say without this opportunity, had I been a different person, a different kind of doctoral students. Yeah, I think so.
I think I'll go. Yeah, I really appreciate so much Icon and Adina. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the quote that healing happens only with the presence of caring others. We need other people to care, to really take this as a matter. And yeah, but like, so going back to when Adina was talking about that we need to slow down. This pandemic opened the space for us to slow down, to reflect to ourselves. And I do see that is essential because, yeah, we burned out, and self-care is real. And then so it's important to acknowledge that there is moments we have so many intentions, but we don't have the capacity. And like Stacy was talking about, teamwork really matters because we need everyone else. We need to work together to acknowledge that we need help and other people need help. So this is going back to Boys and Girls Club of King County. I really appreciate we have this affinity group, the Adolante, that acknowledge the different identities, gender identity and racial identity for staff. So like we have so many passion we want to serve for our kids, but we also need self-care. The pandemic have this isolation, quarantine, all the dramas going on, and then with this affinity group, we are able to reflect ourselves, to listen to our voices, and then reflect other people's story and then tell our stories. And then I think all this process are necessary to moving forward. Just, yeah, trauma-informed practices need ourselves to understand our identity, seeing where we are at, seeing our privilege, seeing where we need help before we can go further. So I think this is what I kind of reflect by listening to you guys, and it's really powerful. Thank you for sharing. And then, yeah, I'm happy to be here today. Yeah, looking for more conversations.
And Dana, if you don't mind, that kind of made me think about in that self-reflection, like being able to say like, yeah, we need to step up our game in this area, or we've missed the mark here, you know, like we talk a lot about the inequities in the larger systems that we've seen throughout COVID. They've just been highlighted and exacerbated, but we need to look at our own organizations. I think Regina was highlighting this as well. Like we need to be able to say, wow, we have, you know, for example, Boys and Girls Clubs. When we were running remote learning, we were seeing a lot more kids coming to the clubs for that remote support, you know, who needed educational assistance or they were on an IEP at school. So we saw like, wow, our staff aren't ready for this. So then we, you know, recognized that, owned that, reached out to external partners. We worked with the Brooks Powers Group to really make sure that we are setting kids up for success before they even walk in our doors. You know, like just making sure our staff are equipped with the tools they need to support kids with what they need. So I think just going forward, being okay, saying like, yeah, you know, we need to pivot, or we need to focus on something that maybe we haven't focused on before, not having that mentality of like, well, this is how we've always done it. You know, like mental health and well-being is something that Boys and Girls Clubs of King County, even though we focus on social emotional learning, we have never really been like, come to us for your mental health support needs. But we are working on creating that with outside partners, again, working with the Seneca Center to get therapists and counselors and people experts in that field to like come into our clubs, you know, not relying on other outside institutions where maybe they were seeing that before, but come into the Boys and Girls Club, you know, and you'll be able to talk to somebody if that's what you need. So I just wanted to add those pieces.
Yeah. And Dana, I'm going to take like 1 minute just quickly. And I really want to center educators in this. I want to also highlight that, you know, when we talk about good disruption, I really want to give kudos to all the brave educators that have kind of shifted away from what has been normal for them, right? And in the pandemic have tried innovative ways to, you know, I guess like you can call the word good trouble. And if I could leave one advice with our educators, no matter where you are and what space you're in, know that you have been chosen to bestow, you know, and cultivate young brilliance. It's such a huge privilege to have that as part of your own legacy work. And I would say, know that your families and your students are your biggest champion. And if you cultivate relationships, they will always have your back. But system creates this wall between our education system and our communities where it's like pinned against one another, that we put them in a box where they have to conform into a system that we know is going to create barrier for them to truly show up as their full human being and why they went into this space to begin with. So I will continue to say that call upon your families, lean into your students, because those young babies and those young brains bring such a brilliance. And once you give them the chance, they can just make your whole entire day feel like just a smooth ride on a train. So, and your parents, I mean, just phenomenal. We have parents that are always saying like, I got to drop a meal for my teacher. And I'm like, I mean, it's just, and a lot of the communities that haven't been served come from this space of, you know, educators are pillars. Like it's our duty to take care of them. But in this, the way the system is designed is that educators, that's all their job. They're just a teacher. They're just a classroom teacher, but that's not, there's so much more. We are so much more. We all are so much more. So how do we continue to hold that and keep that as our value and our shared purpose, and how we relate to one another?
Great. There has been so much wisdom that has come out in this conversation so far. But I am going to turn this back to our community leaders, Regina, Janae, and Stacy. I just want to ask a little bit more explicitly, what has it meant to your organization to partner with our UW College of Education through this Community Partner Fellows program during what has been a very challenging time?
I'll jump in there. We are so lucky and thankful to have Enadina for a whole bunch of reasons, and just especially this 2 years. I mean, I'll just say personally, I grew up in the Yakima Valley, and so having somebody else from the Yakima Valley on our team is helpful in community with me. And I've missed being able to be in community, especially in Yakima, with the work that we're doing. And it has helped us in two very specific ways. One, we were ready and really needed to ground ourselves in more and more focused student and family experiences to drive our work. And we are a small organization. We don't have a lot of staff. And so adding in somebody who essentially came with expertise on community voice and community and family voice, especially in the form of Enadina, was so timely and amazing. And yeah, we just wouldn't be able to do our work. And every, you know, person that we add to our very small staff who brings their expertise makes huge waves, because we're able to do work that then, you know, impacts even state level policy. And so sort of relatedly, because Enadina's from the Yakima Valley, she's been able to actually go back there and be physically in community when almost none of us could be physically in community. And it is so necessary. And it's so necessary, especially with families who have no reason to trust anybody on a Zoom call, especially somebody who looks like me. And so having Enadina be able to be in community with her own community, doing community-based focus work, meant that we could continue to have family and student voice driving our work and to deepen that work and to truly lead our work. And it even resulted in hearing from families and students what they wanted and then making that actually happen in a policy that we're pushing to pass this legislative session. So Enadina got to actually help write policy based on family and student voice this past couple of months. And so again, like we actually wouldn't be able to do our work literally without her being with us. So there you go.
I definitely echo that same sentiment when it comes to HooYu. There is no way like I've been able to do what we've done without her. She is like a vital member of the team. I can't believe it's already been a year since she's been on this team, and it's like I never want her to leave. But same thing, you know, she helped really keep the work moving and really helping us center staff and youth and community voice, you know, hosting focus groups for young people to hear what their experiences are like and how we can shift our programming to meet their needs, or, you know, talking with our staff on the supports and trainings that they need to meet those needs of the youth as well. So yeah, there's like no literal way I would have been able to like make progress in anything other than COVID related safety, as that is part of my job. That's a hat I also wear. So she's really helped kind of like continue the really important work of ensuring that we have all the tools that we need to make sure that kids in our programs thrive. So thank you for you.
I echo what has been shared by both of you. I always say it's been such a blessing, and just sometimes the stars align, and having Icon has just, it didn't feel like someone new was coming to our team. It just felt like just the family that existed just continues to grow and flourish. And it wasn't just like, oh, you know, Icon's role in the organization is just to do the data and like focus on the research, but it's just been so much more, where she fully shows up. She understands like that we're all holding so many things, and she just rolls up her sleeve, things that have nothing to do with, like sometimes she'll go to a resource giveaway in Skyway and volunteer, or in Tukwila, and I'm just like, why are you doing that? It's like, I love being in community. And she brings her whole self and her own lived experience, and she brings her family along the space and building and cultivating relationships. And what I love about Icon is this notion that she talks about, even when my fellowship is done, SPEP is a home for me. The community and the families and the relationships I cultivated is something that I want to intentionally think about, how do I continue? But going back particularly to the contributions and the legacy work that Icon has already bestowed in the org, is that we've always had this dream about incorporating data and research from a non-dominant culture within our org. And how do we elevate the brilliance and the stories that are being shared, but also safeguard them in a way that we're not just tossing them out there to be used against our own community, but really use it in a way that is asset-based and celebrating the resilience and the cultivation and the contributions that our communities have done. And that even when harm has been done, we're approaching it in a way that they're using that to take back their power and infuse their own power, and know that they are in power, and they have always been in power, and they hold that. And, you know, Icon is always asking our community, is this the right approach? Tell me, how do I do it? How do we do it together? Use me as a tool, but I need to tap into your brilliance. And I think in such a humbling way that she fully shows up, and it just brings so much. I think it just fills my heart, and personally, and then also it makes me so proud that as someone that has the privilege of serving as the leader of this team, is that, you know, we are in a working space and a partnering space together collectively as sisters. And I think it's just, I can talk about you all day long, but I'm not going to do it. But I just love this woman, not because, you know, she has just brought this bunch of like just legacy and generational data mindset, but just who she is as a human being first and foremost, and how she shows up. I think that is the most important thing, that we need to move away from, you know, the role that someone holds or the title, but truly who they are, because that is what leaves that long lasting, you know, frame of who they are in your mind and in your heart, and how you honor them years to come, and how do you stay in connect with them. But that's just fully what it's been to partner with Icon. And I don't see Icon as, you know, a fellow. I just see her as a team member and a sister and a partner in this work, and someone who just infuses brilliance into the work that we need to do. So yeah.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm going to come back and thank you again, but I want to make sure that we have some time for the questions that we might have from the audience. I'm going to turn this part of our webinar over to my colleague Braxton, who will help pose questions from the audience. We're going to draw from those that are being submitted through the Q&A function in Zoom.
Hi, everyone. So the first question is for our community partner fellows. How is your experience as a community partner fellow influencing your vision for the impact you would like to have as an aspiring educator and/or researcher?
I think I'll go. Yeah. Going back to a lot of topics surrounded by like equity, social justice, really that constant addressing of equity and diversity, I feel this is something I have been holding. And then I do feel the work with Boys and Girls Club of King County, by doing that, I am actually living in this experience. Yeah, so like going from the mission of Boys and Girls Club of King County and all the works that I have been working with Stacy, and then of course learning from Stacy, all of them, I see myself really want to be this like researcher, educator that always have like being inclusive and responsive to the people that I am working with. And yeah, really an honor working with Stacy. I have to say that again and again, and I feel sad to think about. Yeah, it's almost the end of the fellowship. Yeah, Stacy is an amazing mentor. I have, yeah, making me feel included always. I remember one of our I said trip. Yeah, we went to Bembridge Island for the focus group, and then we had because of the ferry, so we talked a lot, and that was kind of like the first time we had this long conversation. But it feels so like, yeah, everything that I still hold in my heart. Yeah, and yeah, just not enough to say. So going back to this question, I feel this experience working as a community partner fellow, I learned so much from my mentor, and I also see that it's so essential for the institution to work with community, because institution holding this just we need to be aware of that the kind of power dynamics that uneven, and then me as a person from the institution, I have to be really mindful, and then being aware of what I'm bringing into the space. And so I think this is something I am carry with my experience. And then I think I'll stop here. Yeah. And thank you again, Stacy. I'll see you this afternoon.
I can go next. So I'm really thankful to Janae as a femtor, someone who's always looking out for my community well-being, and just being part of this organization has impacted how I see myself as an educator and researcher, or at least strengthen the identities that I bring, because I feel like I can't divorce that I'm a daughter, you know, I'm an auntie, soy una tía, and doing this work with community for me is like when I bring my whole self, I have to show up who I am as a whole person, and that's what keeps me accountable to communities and to their thriving futures, not just surviving, not just looking at what are the racial inequities, but really dreaming about this future in which we are all thriving. And it has really made me think about how do you humanize these university and community relationships, because I don't want to be extractive. I don't want to continue to do that because it's harmful to communities. It's been harmful to my community. And so how do we co-lead in a way that is centering relationships, lived experiences, and the expertise that youth and family bring in order to make those community generated solutions? And how do we bring communities into those conversations? Because oftentimes we could come into a space, we could come into a community and say, this is the agenda that we bring with us, but it's not really being community driven or community generated. So this experience has made me think and reflect deeply about the type of researcher, educator, again, like community member. I can't separate those identities. And that's the reason why I'm so deeply involved. And I want to honor the embodied wisdom and ways of knowing of all communities. And so this has just been a really great experience for me to do that and enact on that. So so I really want to thank just Janae and the rest of the Washington STEM team for allowing me the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it requires a moment of gratitude to Speb, to Regina, to Muna, to Therese, to Helen, to other families and youth. I don't remember him, but when I started the program, I heard someone say, well, you're just like a kindergarten when you start a doctoral program. And you imagine what kind of educator you will be, what kind of research you will be. And I've always, I want to tackle, this is about a political, ethical stance that I will be. And what's humbling is this opportunity at fellowship had made me see that is not just a piped up stream, that is real. And so it made me rethink about research and about what we do in the academia, because maybe I'll borrow an analogy and maybe the audience will appreciate. And I'm thinking of the Vygotsky zone of proximal development. Whilst he's doing this work in the early 19th century, but here in the Western world, we've only like touched base in the late 20th, whatever, I got my century. But anyway, it took about a century later for us to catch on. So our research work is like development. We're lagging. The learning, the stuff that's been done, just doing the community, that just keeps going. So how do I, as a future learning to be a researcher, how can I rethink about the energy, the resources that I and others in academia are using? How can we divert that to the learning, to the things that the community are doing, so that we, along with communities, along with Helen, along with the Munas, along with the aunties and uncles, can do this work together. And we need to, that's a shift that like Regina said, we're working ourselves out of a job. Maybe I am working myself out of the job market before I even entering it. But that's my humble dream.
Thank you all so much for those answers. The next question is, I'm curious about the funding piece. What metrics have you proposed to funders to gauge the success of this work? What are the new metrics?
Yeah, I can go. I'm very clear, and I own it, that I am very transparent and honest with funders, especially in the last 2 years. I don't shame about it. I don't hold my tongue back. I just feel like we need to have the honest conversation. I think one thing that, or at least not just myself, a lot of my partners and colleagues in this work, particularly centering Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants, right? And grassroots, centering grassroots work, people that are closest to the community. How have you funded? And really asking questions, like I said before, Have you been using a racial equity? And in having those conversations, which community members' wisdom have you tapped into? Have you done a historical landscape analysis of where your dollars have been going? And also, what commitments have you made to any advocacy, grassroots-led efforts, system change, a transformational and innovative work, right? Or are you investing in the same old dominant lens, same old ways where you spread breadcrumbs here and there, and you tap yourself on the shoulder to make yourself feel good and saying that we're funding all these people, but you're giving them little here, and then they have to stretch to make things go a long way. And then we burned particular community members who have been harmed the most for such a long time. And we expect for them to give us reports and give us metrics of, this is the accomplishments we made, but you really haven't invested. And if you truly are intentional about creating new ways and building new systems, give sustainable, long-lasting, equitable funding, and make sure that the organizations you're investing, those that are doing the work and experiencing firsthand passed down trauma every day, you're also incorporating healing and self-care resources. Because if we don't take care of them, who's going to be doing this work? You are holding and sustaining what has already been existing. And you are continuing to pass down that privileged way of creating job opportunities for certain people who already have access to it. And you are creating opportunities where the economic gap and the education gap continues to last. So what is it that you're doing? So those are the questions. And right now, nationally and locally, we're in spaces where we're centering what is the investment that's being done in Indigenous communities, and particularly Black-led organizations, and particularly focusing on women-led organizations, because we know that when we look at the metric, women make the most, the least money, particularly Indigenous and Black women, because we fully show up with our heart and we do the work, money or no money. So how are we making sure that their families and they are taken care of, not just salary-wise, but also as a funder, as a partner? How are you thinking about their well-being? How are you investing in their self-care? What are you doing to make sure that they're being taken care of? Because you owe that and more. Like I said, it was never yours. You need to wash it out. It's part of just liberating your mind and living a full life.
Thank you so much. And we were able to answer a few more questions in the Q&A function. So if your question did not get posed, you might still have a response in that section. I just want to share my appreciation for all of our panelists that shared their wisdom with us today. You all exemplify the power of women's leadership and the ethos of love and collective care. I also want to give a big thank you to Deborah, Kendra, Charlene, and Braxton for all of your planning and technical help. We'll also be sharing in the chat a few links to recent Research That Matters publications that highlight the work that we're doing in Unite Ed, Community Partner Fellows, and in our research partnerships with communities across the region. Thank you all for joining us. Please stay healthy and keep your families and communities as safe as can be during this challenging time. Thank you.